Welcome to DuelScreens. I'm Matt, and this is Nick. We're here to review video games new or old, obscure or well-known.
We're lifelong gamers, so we figured, hey, you know what? 2 opinions would be better than just one.
And today we're going to be taking a look at the first 3 Wario Land games on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color.
So without further ado, let's go.
I'm not sure how much an introduction Wario really needs. He's been in most of the Mario spin-off games, as well as the Smash Bros. Series. Well, long story short, he was created by, and I'm sorry if I get this wrong, Hiroji Kiyotake to be the opposite and rival to Mario, being greedy, obese, and hothead compared to our Red Hat plumber. Then in 1992, Wario made his debut in Wario Land 2 as an antagonist and final boss. 2 years later, and the first Wario Land was released, and this was the first game to feature him as a playable character.
We begin Wario Land with Wario chasing some pirates. And that's pretty much all you get from the in-game story until the end credits.
What? That's it?
Well, the rest of the story is in the manual, as per usual back in the day. Basically, after Mario Land 2, Wario got defeated and kicked out of Mario's castle. So now, Wario sets out to go steal the statue of Princess Peach that the pirates stole, to sell it so he can buy his own castle to outshine Mario.
Yeah, that sounds like Wario. And after beating the game, this makes the ending make a lot more sense.
Though once you actually start playing the game, it isn't too far removed from a standard Mario game. Though Wario is nowhere near as agile as Mario, he makes up for it with his strength, being able to shoulder charge, stomp, pick up and throw enemies that are stunned, and instead of mushrooms and fire flowers, there are 3 power-ups unique to this game: the Bull, the Jet, and the Dragon. Bull Wario lets you smash blocks instantly, gives you a stronger stomp that can stun enemies on screen, the Dragon lets you completely torch everything, and the Jet lets you fly like Knuckles the Echidna.
But I think it should be noted that Bull Wario is basically useless when submerged in water. Dragon Wario has a small cooldown time and loses the ability to charge, but those small problems aside, each do give Wario a great advantage, and each control really well. Though unlike recent Mario games, it's 2 hits regardless of what Wario you are. You can't charge as Tiny Wario, and one more hit, and it's back to the checkpoint or the beginning of the stage. And I should bring up that all the checkpoints and some of the end levels require 10 coins to be thrown to activate it. Because of this, collecting coins is absolutely necessary. Thankfully, the levels are littered with them, and you're going to want them all since how many you get actually affects the ending. But more on this later.
As for the stages themselves, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There's an element of exploration for treasure in an otherwise linear platformer, and each stage does look alright for its time.
But unfortunately, Wario Land is not a perfect game. Here's a few problems that I personally had with it.
Why are there so many beginner's traps from the start of the 3rd stage all the way to the last? There are invisible blocks placed purposely to trick the player into getting a cheap hit from enemies, and there's far too much trial and error in certain places. Honestly, after a while I just abused Jet Wario to get around some of these stages.
I don't know, Nick. I feel kind of a bit different. I completely agree. The difficulty does jump around a little bit too much, and the beginner traps were awful. Though I never found it completely unfair, just some earlier stages should have been put later in the game. But let's change topics. After you beat each stage, you could pick a 1 of 2 minigames, a random chance to keep doubling or having the coins that you collected, and 1 to obtain more hearts. Though unlike Mario, hearts will get you extra lives, so you may be finding yourself playing this game when you're low on them. This minigame in particular has you trying to hit an enemy with a bomb, and I did have a lot of problem with the timing, though it's certainly possible. But I do have a nitpick. After you beat each stage, the total coin counter takes too long. Let's say you max out your coins, you have to wait until it's done counting them up to start the next stage, and there's no way to skip or fast forward this.
The overworld map is similar to that of Mario Land 3. Each world is usually only 4 or 5 stages before the boss. Unfortunately, the bosses themselves don't really pose that much of a challenge. The only really annoying part is that once you die, you have to trek all the way back to the boss room. At least the game gives you a power-up before you go back in. The game does follow a pretty standard progression though. Stage 1 leads to Stage 2, 6 into 8. Wait, what happened to Stage 7?
Well, the game does one thing I like. Going hand in hand with the exploration, the game rewards you for replaying stages, though no difference will be found until you hit a huge exclamation block at the end of some stages that changes a prior one, which can either lead to a path for a new stage or to the stage's treasure.
One last thing to bring up, the ending, or should I say endings. As we said before, the amount of coins come endgame determines which one you get, and if you explored and got most of the treasure, getting the best one is really easy. My first time through, I got the log cabin. How about you, Matt?
I got the tree stump ending, but that's my fault, I didn't explore enough. Though I doubt I'll go back and get the best ending, since the next two games blow this one completely out of the water.
4 years later, Wario Land saw its first sequel, simply titled Wario Land 2 for both the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Though I didn't grow up with this one, it introduces a whole slew of new ideas into the mix. This time around, Mrs. Buttersworth, Captain Syrup, returns to wreak havoc by kicking Wario out of his own castle, stealing his treasure, scaring his pet hen, and leaving his water on. That'll teach him. Anyway, gameplay-wise, Wario Land 2 is similar, but different. The controls are still the same, albeit more responsive, and instead of a straightforward platformer, it's more of an action puzzle platformer. The biggest change is that now Wario can't die. Depending on the enemy, you either get knocked back and lose some coins, or you get changed into hilarious new forms, such as Zombie Wario, Spring Wario, and Fat Wario. Well, Fatter Wario. The animations for these are just weird, but they sure have a great charm to them. They also play into the level design, where in order to progress, you have to figure out how to use those forms, giving it that puzzle feel. And this rarely gets too frustrating, since you can very quickly recover from these mistakes. Exploring the stages is still as rewarding as ever. But instead of just getting treasure, each stage has a mini-game where a player matches up the quick-moving image with one found in the treasure chests. The amount of coins you use determines the difficulty. There's also another mini-game after you beat a stage where you have to guess the number. Completing this nets you a piece of a map. What's that map for? Well, play the game and find out.
And then there's two final changes to the game. Stages are now mission-based, with missions ranging from returning Wario's pet hen, to turning off his faucet, or beating a boss. And speaking of bosses, since you can't die, you just get knocked out of the area from where they were, and have to trek back much like the last game. But here's the other big difference. Now you can save wherever you want, as long as it's not during the boss fight. And then there's the main story of the game, but there's also hidden alternative paths that lead to different levels and endings. Honestly, if you had to pick between this and Wario Land 1, this is the much better choice. But we're not done just yet. This brings us to our final game, Wario Land 3. Nick, take it away.
Released in the early 2000s, Wario Land 3 came out exclusively for the Game Boy Color. This time around, the game starts with Wario flying his plane. Well, until his engine explodes and crash lands onto a nearby island. Then he wanders into a cave and comes across a magical box that whisks him away into another world, where he must get 5 music boxes in order to escape.
This time around, Wario doesn't actually start with all of his abilities, and instead must regain them by getting treasure. While not every piece of treasure is needed to beat the game, some treasures open up new paths or levels, and if you happen to get them all, you unlock Time Attack if that's your thing. Level structure this time around is a lot more open compared to Wario Land 2, since each stage has 4 different color chests with matching keys. While this game has half as many stages, totaling at 25, the sizes of the stages make up for this. Although I feel this non-linear approach can be a bit confusing, as I found myself scratching my head on where to go next. Thankfully, the temple can direct you where to go. Now, if only I remember this when I was actually playing the game initially, would have helped a lot.
Personally, I never really had a problem with it, because I think the level design is even better than Wario Land 2. One thing that I liked was the day and night cycle. Some stages are different, and some puzzles can only be solved depending on what time you play them. There are also a slew of new transformations, like Vampire Wario, and the returning ones have new animations. My personal favorite is the owl. In the second game, Wario's clearly grabbing his leg, but this time around...
Yeah, I'd probably make that face too if I got grabbed like that.
Besides all that though, there really isn't that much more compared to Wario Land 2. It's shorter, but I feel like it's more refined. Plus, out of the 3, this one has the best music. Put that on your iPod, cause it's worth a listen.
Well, Nick, what'd you think of them?
Honestly, I'd say skip the first one. The second and third are way better. My personal favorite is the third.
I don't know, I think the first game's fine. It has its merits, though it is the weakest one. But my personal favorite's the second one. But I think any of them are a fine addition to any Game Boy collection.
If you want to add them to that collection, they're on the Nintendo eShop right now. But that's pretty much all we got to say about them.
So until next time, everyone, take care. Hey, much appreciated for checking out our first episode. If you liked it, thank you very much.
More are in the works, but if you're up for future content, subscribe for more. And tell us what you think of today's episode. And if you're an old subscriber wondering where the old videos went, don't worry, we're remaking some of them. But until next time,
I hope you all have a great day and take care.